All right, class. So starting with my lecture on respiratory physiology. Few things before we start. First, know that if you read any textbook on respiratory physiology, it has a lot of numbers and math involved. So my goal for today is to keep things as simple as I can. I'm trying to break things down to my best ability, and of course while doing that I'm not compromising the quality of the material provided to you. So if you have any question on any concept, feel free to reach out. All right, so if you think of our respiratory system, what are the basic functions? Well, the basic functions are taking in oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. Do you agree? Now, we are taking in oxygen. I get that. But then why is oxygen important? Please don't say that we will die if we don't have oxygen. Well, everybody knows that, right? Remember, the oxygen that we breathe in is transported through blood and then goes to or reaches the body cells. And then this oxygen is important for a process called cellular respiration. During the process of cellular respiration, which takes place within the mitochondria of cells, glucose is broken down to generate ATP. Rupa, if we do not have oxygen, can glucose be still broken down to generate ATP? Of course, yes, we learned this in lecture 2. Glucose will still be broken down, but with partial or very small amount of ATP will be generated in that case. So, in order to get a lot of ATP from one glucose molecule, you definitely need oxygen. Also, another important function is removal of carbon dioxide. Why? Why do we want to get rid of carbon dioxide? Well, carbon dioxide, remember, it's a very volatile gas, so it can escape easily. And also it can dissolve in water easily. So the carbon dioxide is mainly produced in our body as a byproduct of respiration, of cellular respiration. And this carbon dioxide gets dissolved in plasma, mainly water, to form something called carbonic acid, as you see here. So carbonic acid is an acid, right? Which then dissociates to form hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Now, do you see hydrogen ions here? That's a red flag. What do we mean when we say we have a lot of hydrogen ions in the plasma? That means the plasma is probably getting more acidic than what it should be. So too much hydrogen ions, not good. It makes fluctuations in your body pH or in your plasma pH, I would say. Therefore, if you have too much hydrogen ions, definitely you need to get rid of carbon dioxide via respiratory system. Okay, so removal of carbon dioxide obviously will reduce the amount of carbonic acid that is being formed, and that will reduce the hydrogen ion concentration in plasma. Good. Moving on. Okay. So, talking more about the functions of the respiratory system. Now, the process of breathing. Do me a favor. Breathe in gently and breathe out. A normal breathing process. The fancy term is pulmonary ventilation. Pulmonary ventilation simply means breathing in, breathing out. That's it. Now, this process of pulmonary ventilation can be divided into two things or two components. We have inspiration, which means breathing in, and then we have expiration, that means breathing out. Another term for inspiration is inhalation. Another term for expiration is exhalation. Now, we are inspiring, right? We are taking in air. And the air, remember, it goes into the lungs, right? At the lungs, specifically alveoli, if you remember from anatomy, at the alveoli you have gaseous exchange. And I want you to understand one thing. Pulmonary ventilation is just movement. So this is your nasal cavity, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Pulmonary ventilation is just air going in, out. That's it. That's pulmonary ventilation. But exchange of gas between, so these are the alveoli of the lungs. You did look at the alveoli model in anatomy, right? So the real exchange between the alveolus, and then there is, let me see if I can change color. No. So there is capillary here. So the exchange between the alveolus and capillary, this right here is called gas exchange, which we will look later. But there is a difference, okay? I want you to know that pulmonary ventilation is not the same as gas exchange. They are different phenomena. This is pulmonary ventilation, breathing, and this is gaseous exchange right here. All right. Now, as we take in air or as we inhale, what happens to our thoracic cavity? Well, if you think of the rib cage and the sternum moves outward, and that increases the volume of the thoracic cavity. Can you just take a deep breath in? What's happening to your chest cavity or your thoracic cavity? Is the sternum pushing out anteriorly? Are the ribs being pulled anteriorly? Yes, and that increases your thoracic cavity. And there is one other concept that I want you to get. As you increase the volume of the thoracic cavity, right? So now you are increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. And as you increase the volume of thoracic cavity, what happens? Pressure goes down. We will talk more about this in the upcoming slides, but this is something that I want to introduce to you right now. Okay. And then during expiration, what happens? Expiration is a passive process. I want you to remember this for testing purpose. Expiration is a very passive process when the rib cage and the sternum and the muscles, everything comes back to resting state. Oftentimes students actually think that, okay, when there is inspiration, the rib cage and the sternum and the thoracic cavity volume is increasing. That's fine. And then during expiration, everything is contracting. No, that's not true. It's like expansion of the thoracic cavity coming back to resting state. Expansion, resting state. Expansion, resting state. That's how things work. All right, so we will look into a little more details into inspiration, and we will just focus on the picture on the right hand side. So as you see, there are two muscles that are involved in the process. The first muscle is diaphragm. As you see here, this is the dome-shaped diaphragm. And then there are these muscles. There are these muscles. Do you see the red muscles that are in between the ribs? Those are called external intercostal muscles. What are those? External intercostal muscles. Okay. So during inspiration, when you are taking in air, remember the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles contract. So the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles contract. As these muscles contract, the rib cage rises. Do you see that kind of rise? That actually widens the rib cage, I'll say. And as the rib cage widens and the sternum is pulled anteriorly, the volume increases. The volume of the thoracic cavity increases. And as the volume increases, the lungs get more stretched, right? So as the lungs are stretched, if you stretch a lung, what will happen to the inside volume? Obviously, volume will increase. And as, remember, I talked about volume and pressure relation. If you have more volume, what happens to the intrapulmonary pressure? Well, intrapulmonary pressure is the pressure within the lung. So obviously volume increases, so that intrapulmonary pressure drops to -1 millimeter of mercury. And due to this drop in pressure within the lungs, atmospheric air gets into the lungs. So air flows into the lungs down the pressure gradient. Okay? To a point when the intrapulmonary pressure reaches 0, which is equal to the atmospheric pressure. Well, Rupa, is atmospheric pressure 0? The answer is no, and we will talk about how we do things in physiology in a bit. But let's review this one more time real quick. So we are looking into the mechanism of inspiration, meaning we are breathing in air. Two muscles responsible for this process. We have the external intercostal muscles, which are attached to the ribs, which are attached in between the ribs, and then we have the dome-shaped diaphragm. These two muscles contract. As these muscles contract, oh, another thing I forgot to mention, as the diaphragm contracts, it actually domes down. So as the diaphragm contracts, and again, we will kind of talk about this more in the upcoming slides. It domes down, remember, it domes down. Okay, so as these two muscles contract, the diaphragm domes down, the rib cage expands, and that increases the volume of the thoracic cavity. Increase in the volume of the thoracic cavity causes the lungs to be stretched. As the lungs are stretched, the pressure inside the volume is more, right? In a stretched lung, the volume increases and the pressure drops to -1 millimeter of mercury. Due to this drop of pressure, we have air flowing into the lungs from the atmosphere until it balances out to 0. All right. Moving on to expiration. Okay. During expiration, remember the rib cage and the muscles come back to their resting state. We have mentioned this before. So during respiration, the inspiratory muscles, which is the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles, these muscles relax. And the chest wall kind of recoils back to its normal state. So the volume of the thoracic cavity comes back to normal, and the lungs also recoil passively, and the intrapulmonary volume decreases. So just the opposite thing. So as the thoracic cavity volume decreases, the lung recoils back, the lung volume decreases, thereby increasing the pressure. So this increases the pressure to +1 millimeter of mercury, and as there is more pressure in the lungs, obviously air will flow out of the lungs down its pressure gradient until it kind of becomes equal with the atmospheric pressure of 0. All right, so hopefully you understand the basic mechanisms of inspiration and expiration. I'll stop here and then start with a new video.